In the beginning, God created. From page 1 of the story of creation, God is established as a creative God. And we are made in his image. We are made as creative beings because God originally created. Recently, our church has begun to identify that in churches across the nation, we do a great job of including the arts in terms of music, in terms of written word, but that we tend to shy away from visual arts, and we begin to ask ourselves why this might be. We've identified it as an area that we particularly want to develop in the church, and so over the next few weeks, we will be seeing changes made in the church, changes to make an effort, a conscious effort to bring visual arts into the church. We are doing this for 4 reasons, and the first is that we are creative beings made in the image of the God that creates. Not only do we see him creating from page 1, but in Exodus 31, God says of a specific man, I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and all kinds of skill, to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut and set in stone, to work in wood, and engage in all kinds of crafts. It is the Spirit of God that indwells this man to be able to do these things, and we too are given the Spirit of God when we give our lives to Christ. And so we want to develop the kind of wisdom, the kind of understanding, the kind of knowledge, and the kind of skill that it takes to be able to create visual art that reveals the beauty of God and leads to his truth. Another reason that we want to do this is in order to train our eyes. The Bible again and again says of the people of God that they have eyes but do not see. We want to train our eyes to see the details, to see the things that might be overlooked, so that in our everyday life we also begin to see these things. We want to train our eyes to see the way that God is working in the world, to see God's reflection in a work of art, that one day we might be able to see God's reflection in our own lives and his fingerprints across it. We also hope to create art in order that they might see and know. Throughout the Bible, when God does a miracle, when he calls his people Israel to him, when he delivers them, he says that he does it that they might see and know. We want to create art that challenges the world to see and know that God is God, that he is all-powerful. We want to create art that doesn't spread this message because it says, here, this is God, look at him, but spreads this message because you look at the art and you say, I see the image of God in that. I see the reflection of God in that. We want to create art that the people around us might see and know. And finally, we want to create art because creating art is an act of worship. Because God has given us this ability and we can worship him by doing it. We see in the Bible that God dwells in a beautiful temple that he calls Solomon to create, and he calls Solomon to create it beautifully. God could have dwelled anywhere on earth. He could have dwelled in his own creation, which he created well. He did not have to dwell on earth, but he chose to, and he called Solomon and the people underneath him to create a beautiful temple that he would dwell in, and they did so as an act of worship, and we too want to create as an act of worship. So perhaps at this point you're beginning to ask yourself, what kind of art will we be creating? Well, from the beginning of time, we find that people have created art for 4 reasons, and we see each of these reasons reflected in God's relationship with his people. The first is out of kinship. In the Bible, God calls his people to dress a certain way, to groom themselves a certain way in order that they might be set apart as different, as his people. Samson's hair was not long because his hair had some sort of a special power in it. His hair was long because it was a physical representation that he was set aside for Christ, that he was God's. In baptism, we have a physical representation of the fact that we are born again and that we belong to God, so that we are no longer of the world, that the old self has died and the new self is here. We want to create art that shows this kinship, that invites others into it, that establish ourselves as God's people. The next reason is intervention, which is the idea of the spiritual coming down in the form of the physical. Obviously, it does not take long to find this in the Bible. Jesus himself is the essence of God, the most spiritual of all things, come down into a physical form that we might better know him. And we want to create art that does this, that gives God the opportunity to make himself known through physical forms, that reflects God in his beauty in order to reveal his truth of his goodness. The next reason that people create is for aesthetic contemplation, which is not just beauty for beauty's sake, but again, beauty for the sake of revealing the truth of God, which is the goodness of God. God created beautifully. God could have created any way, but he created the color red, he created smiles, he created sunsets, he created well. And we want to also create beautifully in order to reveal God. But God not only created beautifully, but he created with ordered beauty. In Job 38, God says, "Who shut up the sea behind doors, and when it burst forth from the womb, when I made the clouds its garments and wrapped it in thick darkness, when I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place, when I said, 'This far you may come, and no further, here is where your proud waves halt.'" God created an ordered universe with things like fractals, and we too want to create beauty that is ordered. This is the concept of aesthetic contemplation. Finally, people create for documentation, and we too want to document the things that God is doing in our church, the things that God has done through his people throughout creation. Obviously, it is not hard to find this. The Bible itself is a form of documentation, the stories of what God has done. But also throughout the Bible, we find stories like this. When Jacob wrestled with God in the desert, God blessed him, but he also touched his hip, causing its socket to be changed, that Jacob might always remember what had happened there. When Jesus gives us the chance to take the bread and drink the wine, he says, "Do this in remembrance of me." And so we too want to create art that remembers, art that documents from day to day, but also throughout history, what God has done for us.
Finally, brothers and sisters,
whatever is true,
whatever is noble,
whatever is right,
whatever is pure,
whatever is lovely,
whatever is admirable,
if anything is excellent or praiseworthy,
think about such things.